Here we're going to add some texturing to give our model some texture that will carry over into Mixamo and then of course carry over into Unity. Just a discussion at the start to kind of recap where we are at. We've got obviously unified mesh model that's pretty clean. Yeah, here I'm discussing some plugins, add-ons as we call them in Blender. You do want import export images as planes, can be useful. Basically takes a PNG image and applies it to a flat surface or maps it. Import export palettes and paint palettes can also be instrumental here. It seems that sometimes in Blender, going to Mixamo, having your image as a palette is important. The way Mixamo takes that PNG. I want to emphasize right now, use PNG. Don't use bitmaps, don't use JPEGs. We're going to be using the material tab to basically add material to our model. We're going to use a texture on that material to basically, but everything, when you give something a surface, it's a material. Principled BSDF is the format. By default, when you add a surface or material, I should say, you can darken it, and this is, similar to what we've seen or what we're familiar with. But I've decided to take a checkerboard pattern, found a PNG, and I'm going to apply it. It won't perfectly map as a pure checkerboard, and I'll explain why, but I'll kind of make it look like a crash test dummy. Basically looking within the sort of materials tab there on the right, and then we go to the materials or shading, and the geometry nodes is how we navigate through to add control over our shading at a finer level. You can use the menu system on the right. Nodes gives you just a better control, and in this case especially using an image texture as a PNG. Just showing here how you can resize the workspace in the shading side of things, and that's how it looks. Use the mouse wheel to zoom in. If you hold down the middle mouse wheel and or middle mouse button, I guess, if you have that, you can drag around that sort of node space there, the bottom half. On the left side is a sort of image editor space. You do want to maybe have your image dropped in there. I've seen a lot of tutorials where that's sort of where the palette is taken from, and it worked here. So you do want to make sure you have that import image as a plane. You go into the tab there at the top, the node texture, image texture. We're going to be basically adding an image texture node, so you'll see it come in here. There it is, its own little thing. And well, the first thing is you want to load the image that you have. Just do it again, load your image, open it up. PNG, can't emphasize enough, PNG is what Mixamo likes to see, and we'll actually have to kind of zip it in to a folder with the mesh when we do the FBX export stage, and then zip it before we go into Blender. Just want to demonstrate here the different sort of views. This is with the light, this is sort of like the rendered, and you only see textures pretty much in the sort of light mode, in the sort of full shading mode. In the solid mode, you don't see textures. So sometimes if you're new to Blender, you bring in your texture and it's like, oh, I'm not seeing anything. Well, you can't just be in the solid view. You have to be kind of in a mode that supports seeing the texture applied, and that's best handled. That's why it's good to keep your light around so you can see. Okay, and then we've done it. Just go back, and of course when you go back to main layout, you again have to turn on that sort of view just to see for sure. Well, now we're back into edit mode. It looks like I've jumped into object, back to that. So you want to apply your transforms again, as always, just to double check, and you're basically getting now ready for the FBX export stage. Basically, as we've done before, there's certain parameters in the FBX export that Mixamo wants to see. I did run into some problems, and I'm going to talk through that quickly. Keep things organized in their own folder. where you can refer to them. Again, we need to copy. This is a stage for the embedding of the texture, and it's more important now that we actually have a texture, have a material surface, it's embedded. The standard features, selected objects, mesh, turning these ones off. Okay. When I run into a problem later on, you'll see that I do things a little bit differently. If I did negative y forward because that's the way I thought my model was oriented. The Mixamo interpretation seemed a little buggy, or if you really want it to work, do a positive y forward, positive z up here, and instead of the problems that you're going to see me get in a few moments, you won't have those problems, and the fix that I do later on, when I do that, you'll have it right away. You have to zip your stuff. You have to zip the image that you use as the PNG for the texture, and you have to zip it with the model, the FBX zip. You drag the whole zip into Mixamo, okay, and this was the start of my troubles. It wanted me to log in, I did. And now we're going to get things coming in. Now, this is because I did negative y forward, okay. As we know, if we go back to Blender, our model has this sort of dark cube on the left side of its face. The dark stuff is on, that's the front, okay. And really, I want it to work so that when I drag it into Mixamo, that Mixamo kind of sees this as the front. Mixamo allows you to obviously rotate, and Mixamo says, well, this is my front now. Tell this to be my front, and do my markers for targets for elbows and wrists and stuff. And Mixamo theoretically is supposed to override that, but as you'll see, it didn't work. So here I've got my front. I've just rotated, and I'll run into some problems. I knew I was in a bit of trouble because Mixamo doesn't usually invert those markers like that. You can see it's mirrored them. It kind of brought them back. I grabbed the right one. It sort of switched to the left one. Well, basically, it's almost like it's telling me I'm mapping from the behind. And you'll see that, as I told you in the previous video, well, we got an error. And that's frustrating. Especially when you know that this model is good. We were able to model it when it was blank. Didn't have any textures or materials on it. Well, the biggest thing I forgot was I forgot no fingers. So we have these paddle hands. I don't even have a thumb. And, I went back and tried again. So I forgot the no fingers. And I'll tell you honestly, you can try to go back and fix and try to sort of say no fingers. But it basically, I found more times than not that it's almost impossible to recover. You might as well just go back into Blender right away. After you see this error, and do your export all over again. Just do it all over again just to have a clean start. It's almost like Mixamo with its back end. Now I did it, okay, and I did no fingers, but Mixamo has, instead of doing my front, okay, and I did my front and I marked it, okay, and you can see the dark space is sort of the face there on the left side. I was frustrated. I basically said, okay, Mixamo, if you're taking my figure and turning him around, I'm just going to go positive Y, even though that seemed counterintuitive to me, but maybe that's an easy fix. And sometimes things get changed, versions of the software, somebody's complained, oh, you're not taking this. Some change happens, and the tutorial that you saw a year ago doesn't quite work out. Sometimes you have to kind of explore and try a few times. I had to try like 4 times. And then finally I said, maybe if I just... So here we see it. Okay, the left side has that dark side that we have in Blender. That was encouraging. So right away it's dragged in and opened up. Mixamo is seeing that that's the front of my character, that's the sort of front surface. And now still I was a bit nervous that these markers were kind of mirrored again, but it ends up working. And maybe it's a bug, I don't know if maybe Mixamo is imagining being dropped into the world like a camera, and if you're looking plus Y, if you're looking plus Y and the character in front of you is facing towards you, it's facing negative Y like we modeled, okay? And I remember to do no fingers this time, and you'll see that we get it. And that's the way we want it, or I wanted it. I mean, that's the way I had it in Blender, that the front of my character has this sort of space, okay? And on the left side of it, and now it's doing a shooting animation. Now, to get the models that we know in our course without any guns in their hand, follow these steps and don't do the animations with skin. This is what we're used to seeing, but I've realized that we can use the Mixamo for Blender add-on, and I'm going to do an extra chapter later on to basically do a version that has the gun in the hand. But we are going to need FBX exports here out of Mixamo with the skin. So if you want to try that bonus chapter later on, do a separate folder for yourself called gun version, okay? And when you're doing all these steps now that you see me do with the exporting of the FBXs for Unity, put the skin version in the gun folder, okay? Otherwise, just have an animation folder for the non-skin versions, okay, in an animation folder. So I'm doing that by default here. I'm just doing now Tpose. You want to basically have a skin anyway, because the Tpose skin version is going to be like our avatar in Unity, and it needs a skin attached to the skeleton to kind of have as a reference. The actions or the animations, okay, idle, running, shooting, without the gun in hand, you're just going to export them without skin. And like we saw with what we're familiar with, those animations are just going to come in as motion FBXs without skin. Okay, I'm just emphasizing there that idle animations and standing animations don't need to be held in place. You'll see when we see the jogging animations. So I'm just doing each one. And there's a great, Mixamo has the option from the menu. You export it as a FBX for Unity, okay? You don't do any frame reduction. You don't keep it at 30 frames. And, the other option is either with skin or without skin. Now, like we're familiar with, okay, we have one model in a Tpose that's our sort of avatar. And I'm just reminding here that if you want to do the version with the gun for later on, make sure you have versions with the skin, I'm going to do that bonus chapter. It's called the Mixamo add-on for Blender. And we need the skin versions of each of the models because chances are you probably want the character running with the gun in the hand, idle with the gun in his hand, and shooting obviously with the gun in his hand. Keep it off to the side though. I went a little faster here today because the last chapter was so long. I probably went too fast here. If there's anything you're not sure on, just go back and pause it and you should be able to see. It's pretty intuitive. The jogging one's a special case. Remember that the jogging will be attached to our nav mesh agent, which is doing the moving around. So you definitely need jogging in place, okay, when you export the animation without skin, okay, to Unity. Now this is without the gun. So because we're going to do special work for the gun later, if you want to have this guy running with a gun in hand, also again just export with skin and put that one into the gun version folder.